One of the most important and often not talked about enough metrics in real estate financing, I believe, is the debt service coverage ratio, or the DSCR. This ratio actually has a lot of implications both on the financing side while you're doing an acquisition, as well as if you're doing any sort of value add and cash out refinance business strategy with your properties. So what I thought I would do in this video is actually talk about what is debt service coverage ratio and the real implications it can have to a real estate project. So with that, let's get at it. What's going on, guys? My name is Lior and welcome back to my channel. Now, before I get into the meat and potatoes of the video, super quickly, guys, if this is your first time on my channel, first of all, welcome. Second of all, make sure you smash that subscribe button for me. I'm putting out tons of new content every single day on this channel, talking about everything in multifamily, from financing to deal analysis, operations, and everything in between. So again, if that's the kind of content you're looking for, make sure you subscribe. So let's get right in and talk about debt service coverage. So before I get into kind of the details, obviously let's first define what debt service coverage ratio is. And basically all it is a ratio of your net operating income of your property or your multifamily, whatever the real estate asset may be, to the debt service, right? So NOI, if you don't know, is net operating income. If you're not familiar with how to calculate that, make sure to check out some of my other videos on this channel. And then when I mean debt service, it is basically just your mortgage payment, right? Like, what is the mortgage payment coming out for your property? So the way you calculate it is you literally divide your NOI by your debt service coverage ratio, and you're gonna get some sort of ratio, right? You're gonna get 1, 1.1, 1.2, depending on obviously the numbers. Now, what this ratio is telling you is by what factor is your NOI covering the debt on the property, right? And that's obviously important for you to know. It's very important for the lender to know, right? Because basically it tells the lender how much margin is there in the deal where they feel secure enough that you're gonna be able to pay their debt on a monthly basis consistently without any interruption, right? So it's obviously a super critical factor. So if your DSCR debt service is 1, it basically means your NOI is your debt service, right? So if you're a lender, right, you might be thinking, well, that's really tight, right? Because if there's any sort of decrease in the NOI, then they're not gonna be able to make their mortgage payment, right? So most lenders typically look for, I'd say, somewhere around 1.2 to 1.25 on the coverage ratio, right? So basically a 20 to 25% margin, which typically gives them enough confidence that there's enough spread to be able to consistently make those payments. Now, one other thing that's important to note too, the DSCR is both property specific and buyer specific. And here's what I mean by that, right? Because if you take a look at the two metrics involved in the calculation, the NOI and the debt service, right? NOI is typically more property dependent, right? It is the NOI that the property in question is producing, but the debt service really depends on the buyer, whoever owns the property, right? Because, one buyer might buy a property with, let's say, 50% leverage, and only take out a 50% loan, whereas on the same exact property, another buyer might use a 75% loan, increases debt, which would increase the monthly debt service, right? So you would have two different debt service coverage ratios. So it really depends on both the property's financials as well as the exact structure that each individual buyer or owner has with his or her bank. Now, the implications of this metric are absolutely huge, right? So on the acquisition side, it is going to be a critical factor in determining, does the property work and how much leverage is the lender willing to give you, right? Because for most lenders, if you're not hitting the correct debt service coverage ratios, right, essentially what it's telling them is that the deal is too skinny and the amount of loan that that you want or you're asking for is going to be too much for the property to handle, right? So, if you're not hitting your debt service coverage ratios properly, the lender might decrease your loan or LTV, or there's going to be some sort of rework, right? Because typically the lender will think that's just too much risk and there's not enough safety in the deal for them to issue that kind of loan. Now, this metric is also incredibly critical in the value add space, right? So if you're doing a value add deal where your business plan is to go in and improve a property through constructions, rent increases, whatever it may be, and then pull out some sort of cash out refinance, right, to return equity, whatever it may be, then the debt service coverage ratio is going to actually have a massive, massive impact, right? Because, if you want to pull out a new loan and do a cash out refinance because you think that you'll be able to increase the value of the property, that's fantastic. But the new lender that you're doing the refinance with is also going to be doing a debt service coverage ratio test, right? And, let's say you're able to increase the value of the property by 30, 40% or something crazy, right? Let's say you've just done an awesome job and the value of the property skyrocketed. And now you're like, well, fantastic. I want to go pull out a new 75% loan and do a cash out refinance. What the lender's going to do to make sure is they're going to look at the current rent roll and NOI of the property and make sure that with the new debt that you're looking to put on the property, right, through that cash out refinance, that it can also be supported on that property, right? So they're still also going to look for that 1.2, 1.25, whatever their threshold is, in order to assure themselves that there's enough meat on the bone or there's enough margin for them to feel comfortable issuing a brand new loan. So you could easily get stuck in a position where, let's say your value skyrocketed so much, you might not actually be able to tap into all that equity if for whatever reason the NOI is not strong enough to put up a strong debt service coverage ratio on the new proposed loan. So this actually has major, major implications, again, particularly in the value add space, right? Because a lot of operators that are using that strategy to try and cash out on the back end really got to make sure their financials are nice and tight for the second lender who's going to be issuing that cash out loan. That's almost just as critical as the calculation of when you're actually buying the deal up front. So hopefully that's helpful, guys. Hopefully, you really start thinking about the debt service coverage ratio. If you haven't at this point, again, particularly if you're doing value add deals, it is imperative that you really analyze this and really look at the debt service coverage ratio from multiple angles, from the acquisition side, from the refinance side, because this is going to have major implications on how much equity you can pull out. And especially if you promised investors to return equity back, or you took some sort of short-term financing with the idea of paying it back through a cash out refinance, right? There's a lot of different implications here that can easily mess up an investor if you're not careful. So hopefully it's helpful, guys. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below.